Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Expensive Coins History channel. When you hold a simple coin in your hand, it rarely feels like something powerful. It feels ordinary at first glance. Just another piece of pocket change that has passed through countless hands, vending machines, store counters, and forgotten drawers. But every once in a while, there is a coin that refuses to be ordinary. A coin that carries a hidden story, a silent rarity, and a value that most people would never imagine. Today, we begin with one of those coins that many collectors overlook far too quickly. The 1982 D Washington quarter dollar from the United States Mint. A coin that, for most people, looks like everyday currency, but for serious collectors, it can represent something far more significant. To understand why this coin matters, you have to slow down and look at it the way experienced numismatists do. Not as money, but as history pressed into metal. The Washington Quarter Series itself carries deep American heritage, honoring George Washington, the first president of the United States. This design has been a long-standing symbol of stability and national pride, and by 1982, it had already been in circulation for decades. Yet even within such a familiar series, certain years and mint marks begin to stand out for reasons most people never notice. The 1982 D quarter was struck at the Denver Mint, identified by the small D mark that quietly sits on the coin. To the average person, that letter means nothing. But to collectors, it is one of the first clues that separates ordinary coins from potentially valuable discoveries. Because mint location, production quality, and survival condition all begin their journey from that single letter that in 1982, millions of quarters were produced. That alone makes many assume there is nothing special about them. But rarity in coin collecting is not always about how few were made. Sometimes, it is about how few survived in pristine condition. And sometimes, it is about subtle errors, variations in strike quality, and preservation over time that transforms something common into something extraordinary. The 1982 D Washington quarter becomes interesting when we start to examine it under a different light. Coins from this period were heavily circulated. They passed through an economy where cash was still king. Credit cards were growing, but physical change was still handled constantly. That means most coins from this era show heavy wear, scratches, and loss of detail. Finding one that has managed to survive in near-perfect condition is where the real challenge begins. And in the world of collectors, challenge often translates directly into value. When experts evaluate a coin like this, they are not just looking at the date or mint mark. They are looking at the surface quality, the sharpness of Washington's profile, the definition in the hairlines, the clarity of the eagle on the reverse, and the original luster that may still remain on the metal. Even the smallest difference in condition can dramatically change the coin's desirability. There are also instances where certain 1982 D quarters show unusual characteristics. These can include slight variations in strike pressure, minor misalignments, or rare minting quirks that occurred during production. While many of these details go unnoticed by the public, collectors often study them closely because they can elevate a coin from standard circulation status into a sought-after piece. Another important factor is the grading process. Professional grading services evaluate coins on a precise scale, and higher grades often command significantly higher prices. A coin that appears almost identical to another in everyday lighting can be worth dramatically more if it receives a higher certified grade. This is why collectors often say that condition is everything. Now, think about how many 1982 D quarters have been lost to time. How many have been scratched, bent, or worn smooth through decades of use? How many were simply forgotten in jars, drawers, or coin rolls that were never checked carefully? The answer is millions. And yet, only a very small fraction remain in a condition that collectors truly desire. This imbalance between survival and demand is where value begins to form. Collectors today are not just buying coins. They are competing for quality. And when competition rises, so does the perceived importance of every high-grade example that appears in the market. The 1982 D Washington quarter, when found in exceptional condition, becomes part of that competition. But there is also something deeper happening here. Coin collecting is not just about money. It is about discovery. It is about the moment someone looks into an old collection, a forgotten box, or inherited change, and suddenly realizes that something ordinary might not be ordinary at all. That emotional shift from ignoring an object to respecting it is what drives so many people into this field. The 1982 D quarter represents that exact possibility. It is not flashy. It does not look different at first glance. It does not announce its value. Instead, it waits silently for someone knowledgeable enough to notice what others miss. And that is where experience becomes important. Seasoned collectors often say that the most valuable coins are not always the ones that look special, but the ones that most people never bother to inspect properly. This coin fits that description perfectly. There is also a growing trend in modern numismatics where collectors are revisiting older circulation coins from the late 20th century. As time passes, even relatively recent coins like those from the 1980s are becoming harder to find in untouched condition. That passage of time alone increases interest and attention. So, when we look at the 1982 D Washington quarter dollar, we are not just looking at a piece of metal. We are looking at a survivor of decades of circulation, economic change, and everyday American life. A small object that has quietly endured while the world around it has transformed. And that endurance is exactly what makes it meaningful. Now imagine this coin not in loose change, but sitting inside a certified holder, graded at a high level, preserved exactly as it was when it first left the mint. That transformation alone can elevate perception dramatically. What once seemed ordinary suddenly becomes a collector's highlight. This is why experienced collectors always emphasize one rule: never judge a coin too quickly. Because first impressions in numismatics are often misleading. The 1982 D Washington quarter continues to attract attention from both new collectors and seasoned experts because it sits at the intersection of familiarity and potential. It is common enough to be found, yet rare enough in top condition to matter, and that is what keeps the search alive. Every coin roll, every old jar, every inherited collection becomes a possible discovery point. The excitement does not come from certainty. It comes from possibility. The possibility that something overlooked might actually hold significant value. And speaking of value, before we move forward to the next part of this journey, it is important to understand what makes this specific coin so discussed in collector circles today. In exceptional condition and under strong market demand, the 1982 D Washington quarter has been associated with values reaching up to $114,000. But that is only part of the story. Because there is another coin from the same year and series that carries an even more surprising level of interest. And in the next part, we will uncover everything about it in detail, including how it compares, why collectors pursue it, and what makes it stand out in ways most people never expect. Now we move forward to the second half of this story, and in many ways, this is where things become even more intriguing. Because while the 1982 D Washington quarter already showed us how something familiar can quietly hold hidden significance, the 1982 P Washington quarter dollar carries its own separate identity, its own production story, and in some cases, even greater attention from collectors who understand what to look for. The P Mint mark represents the Philadelphia Mint, one of the oldest and most historically important minting facilities in the United States. Unlike the Denver Mint mark, which is clearly associated with the D, the Philadelphia Mint in earlier decades often did not use a mint mark at all. But by 1980, that changed, and the P mark began appearing on circulating quarters, including the 1982 issued AT First Glance. The 1982 P Washington quarter looks identical to the 1982 D. Same design, same President George Washington on the obverse, same eagle motif on the reverse, same copper-nickel clad composition. To an untrained eye, there is absolutely no visible difference that would suggest one could ever be more valuable than the other. But in coin collecting, appearances are only the surface layer. The real story always sits underneath. The Philadelphia Mint in 1982 produced an enormous quantity of quarters for circulation. These coins were distributed widely across the United States and entered everyday use almost immediately. That means, just like the Denver issue, most examples were heavily circulated, heavily handled, and gradually worn down through decades of use. However, what makes the 1982 P quarter particularly interesting is not just its circulation, but the survival rate of high-quality examples combined with specific rare characteristics that appear in certain specimens. Over time, collectors began noticing that a very small number of these coins exhibit exceptional strike quality, stronger than usual detail, and unusually clean surfaces even in early grades. When a coin from a high mintage year still manages to survive in near-perfect condition, it begins to separate itself from the millions that were simply spent and forgotten. And that separation is where value begins to form. The Washington quarter design itself plays an important role in this evaluation. The portrait of George Washington is highly detailed, and even minor where becomes visible very quickly. The hair strands, the cheekbone definition, and the subtle contours of the neck are all areas where circulation leaves its mark. On the reverse side, the eagle's feathers are another critical point of inspection. In high-grade examples, each feather remains sharp and defined, giving the coin a sense of depth and strength. For the 1982p quarter, collectors often search for coins that retain strong luster. That original mint shine is something that cannot be restored once it is lost. It is a natural result of how the coin was struck and how it has been preserved over time. When light reflects evenly across the surface without interruption from scratches or dullness, the coin immediately becomes more desirable. There is also the matter of grading again, which cannot be ignored. Professional coin grading services evaluate every detail with precision. A coin that reaches higher mint state grades is not just better looking. It is significantly rarer in survivability terms. Because while millions may have been minted, only a very small fraction remain in truly untouched condition. This is where the 1982p Washington quarter begins to enter serious collector conversations. Not because every example is valuable, but because a very small number of exceptional examples exist that defy the expected survival rate. And then there is another layer that collectors always pay attention to: minting anomalies. Certain 1982p quarters have been studied for slight variations in strike alignment, subtle doubling effects in design elements, and minor planchet irregularities. These are not always dramatic errors, but in numismatics, even the smallest deviation can shift attention toward a coin. Because error coins represent uniqueness, and uniqueness always draws demand at it is important to understand that the majority of 1982p quarters are still standard circulation coins. They hold face value in everyday use. But the reason they are discussed in collector circles is because of what lies at the extreme end of the spectrum. The highest grade survivors, the rare anomalies, and the perfectly preserved examples that manage to escape decades of wear. And that brings us to a deeper truth about coin collecting itself. Value is never evenly distributed. It is concentrated at the top end of preservation, rarity, and demand. Two coins can share the same date, same mint, same design, and still exist in completely different value categories depending on their condition alone. That is why experienced collectors never dismiss common coins too quickly. They understand that rarity is not always about scarcity in production. Sometimes, it is about scarcity in survival. The 1982p Washington quarter dollar also benefits from a growing collector trend. As time moves forward, coins from the late 20th century are gradually becoming modern classics. They are no longer new, yet they are not ancient either. They sit in a unique space where collectors begin to reevaluate them with fresh interest. This shift in perception plays a major role in driving attention toward high-grade examples. Now, when we compare both coins from this year, something interesting becomes clear. The 1982D and 1982p quarters share almost identical physical characteristics, yet their collector appeal depends entirely on condition, rarity of preservation, and market demand at the highest grades. And in this case, the 1982p Washington quarter, when found in exceptional certified condition, has been associated with values reaching up to $120,000. That number surprises many people at first because it challenges the assumption that modern-era quarters are only worth their face value. But coin collecting is full of such surprises. It rewards patience, knowledge, and attention to detail. So when you look at both coins together, the message becomes clear. The true value is not in the date alone. It is not in the mint mark alone. It is not even in the design alone. It is in the condition, the rarity of survival, and the willingness of collectors to recognize what others overlook. Somewhere in circulation, there may still be coins like these waiting to be discovered, sitting quietly in jars, drawers, old collections, or forgotten storage boxes, waiting for someone to take a closer look. And that is what makes this subject so powerful even today. Because every coin tells a story, but only a few are ever truly heard. The 1982p Washington quarter dollar stands as a reminder that even the most ordinary-looking objects can carry extraordinary potential. And when placed alongside its Denver counterpart, it completes a full picture of how small differences in minting history and preservation can create enormous differences in value. So, if there is one final takeaway from this journey, it is simple. Never underestimate what you have not examined carefully, because sometimes the smallest coin in your hand might hold a story and a value that changes everything. And in the case of the 1982p Washington quarter dollar, that value, in exceptional condition, can reach up to $120,000.